All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Council in Your Neighborhood. I'm glad everybody can join us. The numbers that we've seen so far is that we have at least a few hundred people who are tuning in to talk about Ice Storm Landon and MLGW and some of the things that went right, some of the things that went wrong, and how we can improve in the future. I think that's a discussion that's important. We have every time that there's a major outage event, just but given the significance of this one, wanted to be able to have more direct interface with the community, with MLGW to answer some of those questions. So for tonight's format, first I'm going to go over a little bit of why we're here. I'm going to do a very brief history of the electrical infrastructure discussion that we have had at council, some of our votes, some of our budgets. And then we're going to go to JT Young and his team for a presentation that MLGW gave to the city council 8 days ago. But I understand a lot of people aren't able to tune into a 2-hour committee meeting on a Tuesday morning. It was very informative. It was very helpful and instructive about Ice Storm Landon and some of the processes of MLGW. And so I hope y'all will find that as valuable as well. And then we'll go to questions. I definitely want to hear from y'all. Over the last 3 weeks, we've already received a lot of questions that we've compiled. We've received questions in advance for this event. And then if you have questions that pop up throughout our conversation tonight, please email them to worth5 at memphistn.gov. And you should see that scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now. So you can email worth5 at memphistn.gov. We've got city council staff here monitoring that. And I will read out those questions and try to compile them as best I can. And we'll keep this to an hour so everybody can enjoy their evenings and get back to family time. But we're going to try to get through as much information as we possibly can. So to start off, why we're here, again, I think this is an important process for government trust and transparency to have an honest conversation about what went right, what went wrong, and how we can improve. And if I'm going to be here sitting in this chair and talking about some of the things that went wrong, I think first and foremost, the appropriate thing is to start with myself, to start with city council about some of the things that I think we can improve. I've been on the city council for over 6 years now. And one of the things that I think is a constant source of that could be improved is just communication. So I will start off, and maybe this makes me a bad politician, but I'll start off with an apology to you, the customers and the constituents, that I think communication could have been improved up front from my end. Probably should have used the resources on social media, Nextdoor app, things like that from the beginning to help communicate and amplify the message about expectations, about what y'all needed to do in the event of a power outage, how to communicate with MLGW, that our office was available, listening, and relaying information as quickly as we can from you, the customer, to MLGW, then back again, in order to deal and address with whatever outage that your neighborhood and family was going through at the time. And then that could have better helped y'all prepare about the plans that you needed to make that week. I was following along with MLGW information. I was encouraging people to call the hotline, to go into the app, to report their outages, and then also to anything that came across text, email, phone calls to our office. We were doing that. I just wish we'd been a little more proactive and a little bit more aggressive in terms of getting that out there ahead of time. So I will start with that. I will say the city council is an institution. As I get into the brief history, I think there have been mistakes made. I have been on the council for 6 years now. We've gone through a lot of MLGW budgets. Back it was our 2018 budget that MLGW management and MLGW board began this conversation that we're in the midst of now about increasing or improving our infrastructure, electrical infrastructure at MLGW. And they wanted to increase rates to do that. And that is always a difficult and the trickiest part of any budget is balancing that priority where we're trying to provide a great service at an affordable cost that's going to be reliable. And we do everything we can to keep those costs down, but we have to have reliability. And we were concerned, MLGW management was concerned, their board was concerned that we were not making the investments like we needed to in our electrical infrastructure to be able to have that reliability, that there needed to be an increase in rates. We would then use those proceeds and future proceeds from that rate increase to bond out money to make a major investment into the electrical infrastructure. MLGW asked for that. The city council said no. It was a divisive debate and a split vote. I agreed with MLGW management. I thought they made their case. We were concerned about this exact type of event happening, where there would be a major storm or major outage that could be worsened or have a continued impact because of our aging infrastructure not being able to hold up as well to new pole replacement, to increase tree trimming. So in 2018 budget, they asked for it. It was denied by council. In 2019 budget, they asked for it. It was denied by council again, 0% increase. And then the 2020 budget, it finally passed after, again, a lot of debate, split votes. And it was put in place a 2.7% increase 6 months later. So to be perfectly fair, we could have gotten on the road to electrical infrastructure improvement in the city of Memphis faster, 30 months faster, I think, if city council had been on board from the beginning and listened to management. So I think that is something that was an institutional failure of the city council. And now that we're on the right path, part of our job when these storms come up is you don't want 13 council members out in the street doing triage, directing MLGW crews to say this light has to come on next, or this property is a priority. That ends up being chaos. Our responsibility really does come before and after the event, and then during, again, like I was talking about, the communication, to make sure that processes are in place, that the budget is adequate, and that we've got the right priorities in terms of the budget, plus whatever may come up during the year. And then also that the personnel are in place to execute on that budget. So in saying that, I have full confidence in JT Young and his team. We've had a lot of conversations about this. Obviously, there are things that go wrong. I think they're going to address them from the MLGW side. They're going to give a little bit more explanation as to their processes. And then we're going to love to get to y'all's questions. So again, any questions that you might have, please email at worth5@memphistn.gov. And now I will turn it over to JT Young to introduce himself, anybody from his team that he'd like. And we're going to hear their presentation and then get to y'all.
Well, thank you, Councilman Morgan. Good evening to those of you who've joined. Welcome. Glad to be here, and certainly want to get to your questions. I do want to mention that we do have some folks here from MLGW, in addition to me, that you may hear from tonight, depending on your questions. And so I'll just quickly share some of the names of those folks that you may hear from. One is Alonzo Weaver. He's our Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, has responsibility for all the operations around MLGW. And so he's with us. Gail Carsons, who many of you know, is our Vice President of Community and External Affairs. She's with us as well. Nick Newman is with us. He is our Vice President of Engineering and Operations. I think Cliff DeBerry is with us, Vice President of Construction Design and Delivery. Jim West is our Vice President and Chief Customer Officer. Brad Gates, I believe, is on, and he is our Electric Construction Manager. And then I believe Greg Deaton is with us, and he is our Electrical Construction Support Manager. They all can bring some things to the table in some of the questions. I do want to spend just a few minutes. Last week, you heard Councilman Morgan speak about last week that we had an opportunity to share with the council some information via a presentation. And I'd like to go through that very briefly, if I can, with you. And first of all, I'll just talk about our mission and vision that some of you may be familiar with if you've been to our website: to safely deliver services that create and sustain superior customer experiences. That's our mission. And our vision is to be the trusted provider of exceptional customer value in the communities we're privileged to serve. And I do want to start off by sharing from my heart, and sort of akin to what you heard from the councilman, to the extent that we did not live up to our mission and vision and our commitment to the community in the restoration process after this storm. I certainly apologize on behalf of MLGW. We are working diligently to make improvements so that we can get better. And we know we can. This particular storm was massive, covered over 2,200 miles. And at the peak, you're going to see a couple of different numbers tonight that I'll talk about in terms of customers affected. You'll see there 186,000 customers were affected at the peak. And that means at the peak of outages, that's the number of customers that were out. Total customers affected of 233,640 means that over the period of time that we considered the storm to be active, that's the number of total customers that experienced an outage over time. So you'll see those two numbers probably as we go through this. As you know, national attention was brought down on our community due to the impact of this storm. Let me give you some historical context. If you can see this, I hope it's visible. Some of you can remember some of these storms, and what we've tried to do here is show where Winter Storm Landon impact falls within the realm of many other storms that occurred in recent history. And if you'll notice, of course, Hurricane Elvis, those of you who were here back in 2003 remember that, 339,000 customers affected. The most recent ice storm prior to this one was in 1994, 281,000 customers impacted there. And you can see where Landon falls there right after the Tom Lee storm. And then to the right, you'll see the actual duration of hours, the number of hours it took to restore customers. So you can see from this storm that it was pretty close to the Tom Lee storm in terms of time frame, nowhere near, not quite as long as it took for the 94 ice storm. Ice storms have their own characteristics, as I'm sure you may know by now. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but this is just to give you a historical perspective of where this storm fell out. Let me speak for a minute about our preparation. We do prepare. Some of the folks who I mentioned tonight that are with me are a part of this, but we do have an emergency response plan that is updated annually. We look at making sure that we have crews available and on standby. We look at supplies. There's a whole lot of things that goes on as we prepare for storms. And we actually make sure that we have the supplies. We make calls. We actually met as a team. Our crisis management team met on Wednesday, the day before the storm, just to kind of get everything together, acknowledging what we thought was going to happen. So we do have an emergency response plan that we put into place during this time. The outage damage was severe. This is going to show you, these few pictures will show you some of the damage around the community, which I know many of you probably saw firsthand. I got out and about with some of our crews and was aware personally of a lot of this damage that took place throughout our community. It was massive. And this is, again, the beginning to show some of the restoration efforts that took place across the footprint that we serve here in Shelby County. You will notice that most of that damage that you saw earlier was tree damage. We'll talk about that, of course, again in just a bit. Round the clock efforts for restoration. A lot of these areas were not easily accessible areas where we had damage. We had to get crews to manually get in and out of some of these areas. But just, again, a lot that had to go on to get restoration take place. Let me speak about, speaking of restoration, our restoration prioritization process. It's really important to sort of understand how this works. We know there were certain things that went on in our restoration process during Landon that we could do better, and we're going to work on that. But I do want you to understand the general process of how we do restoration following a storm. Of course, initially, we're concerned with public health and safety facilities and public safety in general, making sure that we do our best as quickly and as safely as we can to secure things and make things safe. There are certain facilities that we want to make sure, police, fire, hospitals, water pumping stations. We actually had challenges during this storm on day one with some of our pumping stations being able to make sure that we had water flow. Some of you will remember from last year in February, we had an issue with our pumping station, so that water delivery was challenged for several days. Fortunately, in this situation, we did not have that problem, but we also had to call on TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, to reduce their usage of water at their plant to help us because we lost power to some of the wells and whatnot that deliver water. So we do that early on to make sure we can maintain those critical facilities. And then we began moving to what we call working our primary circuit outages. And that would be, if you look see the number 4 here, when you are driving down maybe Union or Poplar, or you're driving down a main road, you may see these lines on poles, the larger lines up, the highest lines. Those would be called circuits. And those are, we try to make sure we get those up first, because bringing those on first gets the most customers. So we get the largest return for our efforts. So we really try to focus on bringing those up first. Then we begin to move downstream, as you see on this schedule here, downstream from those circuits, to maybe bringing up, having to do things with fuse circuits behind the main circuits, ultimately to homes and businesses. And so we don't really go by neighborhood. We really go from an electrical standpoint when we look at what to restore first. Once we've made things safe and dealt with those primary facilities, then we start looking at our electrical system and seeing where can we pick up the most customers the fastest. We are always focused on making sure we're safe in doing that. I would like for you to see the timeline of the restoration, and this is using that 186,000 peak number that I talked about a little bit earlier. You can see over the course of several days what happened with restoration. So we picked up, a good number of customers fairly early on. Unfortunately, we still had probably somewhere around 1 to 2% of our customers that were still out 6-7 days later. And so that created, we know, a lot of frustration. And I'll talk about some of the reasons why that happened. But I did want you to see that the restoration progress that happened over time. Let me give you some factors to consider. I just mentioned safety. It's paramount. We deploy our resources with safety in mind. We would love to have an infinite number of resources, but we can't safely manage that. And so we want to make sure when we deploy our resources, we need them to work safely. And we want to make sure that we get power restored just as quickly and as safely as we can. We had a lot of contract crews that you'll see in a minute, the numbers that we were able to bring in, but we couldn't get them in as early as we wanted because, as you saw from that first early slide, the storm was massive. And so a lot of adjacent areas where we typically would get our contract crews from couldn't release their crews to come help us because they weren't sure what was going to happen in their areas. We did have issues, and I'm sure you know this, with our outage text alert system, a relatively new system that we had just rolled out within the past couple of months. We had damage to the infrastructure that's used to help communicate with that system uses to communicate. And so therefore we had a number of challenges with that system. And again, our apologies for that. We're working to make that better. The next time, we know that created a lot of confusion, and we are keenly aware of that. We assign our crews to the sources of problems on our system, which may not always be visible to customers. So our network, because it spans across a number of different areas that are both seen and not easily seen, we know that customers sometimes may not see where the crews are, but we have crews assigned to where those problems are, as I mentioned earlier in the restoration prioritization. They may assess damage sometimes and leave without doing anything that the customer may see. That's not because we don't intend to fix that, but it's because they're doing an assessment of the damage. And so sometimes that means they'll come, they'll assess, and then they will leave to go to where they can do the most good in terms of bringing on the most customers. The work they may do where that damage is may not bring anyone on. So they'll go to where they need to be after making that assessment. And we always remind public to stay away from any downlines and to treat any downline as energized. We know there was a number of areas where lines were down, and we talked about that and trying to make sure folks stay safe. Relative to District 5, there are just a few things here I'll mention real quickly. The largest concentration you'll see on a map here in just a minute of outages of customers that were affected were in District 5, and due primarily to some of the additional damage that we discovered downstream from our circuits. Remember when I talked about our restoration process and how we do that with circuits, and then we move on from circuits, we found significantly more damage this time than we have historically after storms downstream from where our circuits are. And because of the proportion of that damage, restoration timeline was really slow, predominantly because of trees. And you'll see a picture here in just a minute of that. We did have both overhead and underground outages to occur throughout our service area. Customers that were served underground had outages, as well as customers that were served overhead. I hope you can see this. I know it may be a little bit tough to see this, but this is a map of our entire Shelby County. And what you will notice here, this is attempting to show total customers that were impacted or affected by the storm and the percentage of those customers within those areas that were affected. So we have within the city of Memphis, we have it broken out by district, by council member district. And then we also show in the outlying areas by municipality. And then we have a chart imposed to the upper left side of that map that shows the actual numbers. And so what you will see here is there was impacts across the system, of course, with numbers of customers impacted. You will notice District 5 at 73%, while that percentage was not the highest, it did represent the highest concentration of actual customers that were out at 36,770. So there was a huge concentration relative to many other areas of customers actually impacted. And this is what we call this a density heat map. And let me explain this real quickly. The first map on the left really just shows you, if you see the red, that's where we have customers across our service area, is the red. In the middle, it's showing just District 5, and it shows the customers that were actually impacted by the outages within District 5. And then the one on the right shows you the same picture, but it shows every area. You may notice a higher concentration of red within District 5 for the reasons I stated earlier, but this is just to give you a pictorial view of the actual impact of the storm in terms of outages within District 5. Another way to look at this, another thing to look at here, Memphis is, if you will, an urban forest, as I've been told. What this also shows is where the green shading represents the tree density by area. And this, again, is a picture of the county predominantly, but shows also within the city council districts. You can just see we've got trees everywhere, of course, but some districts have less tree coverage than others. And that's where we see in District 5 pretty significant tree coverage on a per customer basis. So that, again, gives you an idea of one of the reasons why we had so many challenges in this district. This particular slide actually shows, we call these, they're tickets that are issued when we do the assessment that I mentioned earlier. Tickets are submitted that basically acknowledge issues that are out in the field. And when you look at where we had the most tickets regarding damage in the field, District 5, once again, represented, had the most, if you will, in terms of percentage. And really, if you look at that far right column, District 5 also had the greatest number of tree trimming tickets associated, with restoration. So again, a lot of tree issues throughout the area, but certainly Districts 4 and 5, in particular, District 5 was really significant, had a significant number. I want to talk for a minute about resources. I talked to you earlier about the importance of getting contract crews in here, which we were able to do. The blessing we had was that we had our crews available. We had some in-house contract crews available. And then we were able over days to get more and more outside contractors to come in. And up to 90 contract crews, which was about 450 folks. And over time, throughout this process, we had really more than 1,100 folks in the field dedicated to restoration. But let me also mention that we had a large number of folks not in the field that were also dedicated. Many of those, some of you may have talked to from our phone center. Some of those folks were in our warehouses getting equipment and resources for these crews to use. So there were a number of people. Other folks were in the operations area doing things to operate our system. So there were probably closer to 2,000 people really involved in the restoration effort. But I wanted you to see the number of folks that were dedicated in the field. And of course, lots of communication. We created some dashboards. Some of you may have seen this. If you went to MLGW.com, you may have seen some of these dashboards. The bottom one on the left in the blue shaded area shows where our crews were dispatched at that moment in time. That was at 8 p.m. on February the 6th. And you can see where the crews were based on where the outages, and the outages are in the green, they were spread everywhere. But our crews were deployed in a number of places. On the far right at the bottom, you'll see a red and blue dots on a map. We began to put this together to help show where the red were the outages, the blue was where outages had been restored. So we were trying to show restoration progress. So we were trying to do this by way of communicating, knowing that everyone couldn't see this because everyone didn't have power, and we knew that. But we were trying to get this out to the media, trying to get this out to those who did have power, because if you'll notice from the other slide I showed earlier, about half our customers did not experience any outages at all. And so there were a number of customers, and then several customers came back on relatively quickly, as you saw in that slide that showed the restoration timeline. So we were trying to do our best to communicate what was going on in real time, updating it 2 to 3 times a day. And we were engaged in the community doing things like food banks and food pantries, making sure that we were communicating with our customers. Speaking of communicating with customers, this is just to give you an idea. On an average day, that orange line that you see going straight across represents, on an average day, our call center volume, about 4,000 calls, give or take. And Jim West, again, he's on here. He can talk more about that if there are questions. But you can see what happened during the course of the storm, what the numbers were, the call volume. We had the call center open 24/7 to be able to respond to calls. And we knew that there were going to be calls, and so we tried to make sure we staffed accordingly to help that to happen. This is the outage hotline calls that we had over that period of time. You'll notice on day one, almost 170,000 calls that were handled by that outage hotline. It's an automated line. Some of those calls were likely duplicates, but nonetheless, a fairly significant volume, and you can see how that trailed off over time as well. Let me talk a little bit about next steps, because now that we've gotten electricity restored, we really must do things to restore the trust and credibility with you all, with our customers, with our community, and with all our stakeholders. These are some things that we're planning to do. We've suspended disconnects. We're planning to restart those disconnects, I believe, on March 7th. Again, Jim can bring more clarity to that. Bill payment assistance, we're helping with that. For those customers who had challenges associated with damage to their electric equipment at their home, we're looking at providing some no-interest loans for those customers. We still haven't finalized that. We're in conversations now to get that done. The mobile food pantries I talked about. We have an infrastructure improvement plan. You heard Councilman Morgan talk about the basis for our rate ask that we had, that we got approved back in 2020. And we are looking at expanding that. And one of the ways we're going to try to do that is through the formation of what you may have heard about, that the mayor has talked about, and is the formation of this outage improvement advisory team. Doug McGowan and I will be chairing that team. I actually had a call with him earlier today about this. This group will likely be comprised of members of our existing neighborhood advisory council, as well as the community advisory council, which is representative of our stakeholder base. It's a grassroots group. They're already formulated and together. So we're going to be in the process over the next few days of finalizing that and begin having our first meeting of this team probably in mid-March. And this team will be focused on viable options to improve the outage situations overall, not just from this storm, but just overall in general. And we'll bring some options to the table for us to consider. And so I'm looking forward to the activities of this team. Speaking of that, one of the things you've probably heard a lot about is going underground with services. I want to mention and remind everyone, about 40% of our electric distribution system currently is underground. And when you compare us against what we call the Big Eight, which are 7 other larger Tennessee-based local power companies served by TVA, we have the highest percentage of underground today. Doesn't mean we don't need more, doesn't mean we shouldn't consider more, but I do want to make sure everyone is aware of that. There are some cost considerations. It's about $1.3 million per mile estimated to do the conversion. It's much less expensive to put underground in where you have no services at all. But if you might want to imagine what it might look like converting those overhead lines going down Poplar or going down Union or in certain areas that are heavily populated, converting those to underground is no small task. So it's estimated to be somewhere $6 to $8 billion if we were to take 100% of our remaining underground overhead services and miles of distribution and convert those to underground. Pretty costly, but there may be somewhere in between there where we would look at that to consider. It also means when you go to underground that you don't just put those lines underground, you then have to consider what goes to the homes and businesses. Those lines that serve those homes and businesses, those too must be converted to underground. The meter cans need to be changed out. There's got to be a lot of other things done. So doesn't mean that you don't do it. It just means that you have to make sure you considered all the things that matter with underground services. We do have some early lessons learned that I'll just quickly mention. I won't go through all of these. We do want to make sure that our customer care team has timely information so that when they get those calls from you, from our customers, that they can convey accurate information. Our text alert system, we talked about that. Probably should have disabled that a little bit sooner because it caused a lot of confusion. It works well under normal conditions. This situation was one that was really rather catastrophic. It was a big deal, and our text alert system just wasn't quite ready for that. We know we had some things we got to fix on that. Damage assessment strategy, we're going to relook at making sure that we are doing things for our outside crews that come in so that we can quickly get them acclimated. That means their staging locations or anything that needs to be happening from a logistical standpoint. We want to make sure we do that right. We also want to make sure that we are considering ahead of the storm, making sure we're communicating better with customers around an estimate, erring on the worst case scenario of how long you might be without power. It's hard to estimate that, just to be honest. I've been through more than a dozen hurricanes. I came from Florida, and I'm very familiar with storm restoration processes. It is always, every storm is unique, every storm is different, has its own characteristic, and therefore restoration time is always going to be some guesswork. But we need to make sure we do a better job of managing expectations for customers. And there are other things that we need to do, like making sure that we look at our structure for our crisis management team, making sure that we tweak that as needed to make sure it's optimal and efficient. So just in summary, as I know we want to get to your questions, it was the fourth largest event in the history of our recent history of MLGW as we've been tracking events, storm events. Our outage restoration time was really similar to what happened in the Tom Lee event. No matter how we serve customers, outages and storms will be a part of our business. There will always be situations. There's really not a scenario that can eliminate 100% of outages. So what we are working to do is making sure we minimize the frequency and certainly minimize the duration of those and manage expectations with our communication system around that. We also know that customers don't want to think about their electric service. You just want it. You want to have it when you need it. We take it for granted, and it should be available. And we're working to make sure it's better. That we're better at that. We talked about the restoration and communication process that we need to improve. We're looking at the strategic underground. I know there's a lot of other options that we may be considering on improving reliability and resilience of our distribution network. And I just can't stop or end this without thanking the folks from MLGW, many of whom are led by those folks on this call with me, who are out in the field. Those are our heroes. They were out and about in conditions, and I was out with them. Many of them did not have power, but they were out there doing their best to restore power in our community. And so we're going to do our best to get better. I do know that there are going to be opportunities for that to happen in the future. I wish there were no more storms. Can't say that. We're going to probably see more of them and more intense storms too. But I want to thank you for this opportunity. Certainly want to be able to take any of your questions that you have. I'll turn it back over to you, Councilman Morgan.
All right. Thank you so much, JT. That was a part of the presentation that we received at council last week. And I wanted everybody, again, just to have the opportunity to hear that straight from MLGW. And I also wanted to them and the employees up and down the line. They were working 16-plus-hour shifts to get this restored. And again, like you said, many of them were without power themselves, but coming in day and night to really manage this crisis as best as we could. So we talked a little bit about the past and what happened. I also want to talk about the future and some of the things that I'll be focused on and working with MLGW on your behalf for future storms. One of the things I think we also fell short on is we talked about tree trimming and trying to increase it, and we've had increased goals for tree trimming over the last few years. Last year's goal was 1,400 miles. We fell short of that. I think JT expressed last week that we got to about 625 out of 1,400. That's not good enough. We know if 1,400 was the right and appropriate number, we need to meet that, and then it could have possibly mitigated a lot of the outages that occurred in this past storm. We had a pole replacement strategy. It was on track last year and going well, but it had a slow start after we passed the budget. We should have been able to get through that and through some of those pole replacements. Look, if a 100-pound or 100-year-old tree comes down and hits a pole, it's probably going to take it out. But there were some poles that needed to be replaced that were rotted through, that were taken out by damage that probably shouldn't have been enough to do so. So those are some of the things we're focused on. The call center data that he shared, one of the things I was proud of, my first month, my first meeting with the mayor on city council, number one problem I talked to him about was our 911 call center. And it was an embarrassment. It was at a crisis level in terms of how we were handling it and management from previous administrations that we inherited it from and what our numbers and statistics were. And we did a lot of work to be able to look into it, to turn it around, to invest in personnel and new space to make sure it's up and running. I heard a lot of frustration from customers over the last few weeks about their interactions with call center. So we have the data. I'm going to look into it deeper. Can't give you a full dive or information or what we'll see, but just know that's something we've had success with the city on the 911 side, and I'm going to be working with MLGW behind the scenes and then sharing with y'all later what we find out, and just making sure that as people call in, average wait time, not just answering the calls, but making sure that average wait times and customer satisfaction are priorities, and that people aren't abandoning calls because they've been on hold for too long and they've got to go about other things throughout the day. So those are a few of the things that we'll be focusing in on and making sure that we improve. And I'll personally be working on at City Council. I know this was a frustrating experience. Thank you all for hanging in there. And there was also a lot of gratitude expressed from citizens to the crews. I've got stories of people coming out and bringing them coffee and ordering pizzas, and I want to thank those that did that as well. This was a community event, and I think in these tough moments, I'm always proudest of our community in Memphis and the ability to look at one another as neighbors, and I mean that in the broadest sense of the word. And yes, you're trying to make the best decision for you and your family, but also that community investment and that neighborhood feel. There's something special about the spirit of Memphis, and that was reflected in this difficult time as well. So getting to the first question I have is about bills, and that we're getting lots of calls and emails from people recently receiving much higher MLGW bills. Are these spikes a result of the recent power outage? Is it more in line with usage or some sort of seasonality?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to call on Jim West to chime in if he can. And I would say that the answer to that is no, it's not related to the outage, but I'll ask Jim to kind of speak to that. I know your team's been dealing with those calls. Jim?
Yes, thank you. So I'm Jim West. I'm Vice President and Chief Customer Officer at Memphis Light, Gas, and Water. So the higher bills recently are due to two things primarily. One is weather. It gets colder in the wintertime, and it takes more energy, whether it's electricity or gas, to keep your home warm. And secondly, you might have seen our communications campaign back in the fall. Natural gas prices did go up this winter. And so the price per unit of gas is higher this winter than it had been in the milder months. So those two things combined are resulting in higher than normal bills. Your President Young mentioned no one is at risk of being disconnected for non-payment. We expect to resume March the 7th, disconnecting for non-payment. And we are here to assist for anybody that is challenged to make payment or get current with us. Please call us at 544-6549. That's why we're here, to serve you. That's what we do. So don't hesitate to call if you're in need of assistance, and we will work with you, and we'll connect you with the community resources that can help.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Next question goes back to tree trimming. There were rumors online and news reports about tree trimming crews being robbed. What are the kind of the truth behind those stories, and what are we doing to protect them and these tree trimming crews in the coming year? Did that impact our goal or ability to trim 1,400 miles?
So I'm going to ask Alonzo Weaver to chime in on this, but I will say that we did have episodes where there were some of our contract crews that were tree trimmers that were subject to robberies, and so that did occur. I'm gonna let Alonzo talk about that. We've had some challenges. The contractors had challenges maintaining personnel, but Alonzo, do you want to address that?
Sure. Alonzo Weaver, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. Prior to the storm, we've had some challenges with tree trimmers being robbed of equipment, etc. That has not helped us to get enough tree trimmers to do the miles that we had planned to do. So we're still trying to work with our contractor to try to improve that. I'm not aware of any issues that happened during the restoration, however. We did have a few challenges with a few customers here and there, but that wasn't necessarily with the tree trimming crews, but we did have some problems in those groups prior to the storm.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next
and
question.
I will mention, Councilman, one of the things to keep in mind, sometimes there are tree trimmers that we use to clear lines, and there are also private tree trimmers that are used or tree services, that do private work. So sometimes there's not a distinction, and I'm sure both have been involved in some of these unfortunate incidents. But
I'll follow up with.
Yeah.
I'll follow up with a budgetary question. I know one of the last tree trimming contracts we saw come through City Council. These are a spinning wheel.
I think you're freezing up on me. It may be me.
No, I think it may have been both of us. I'll start over in saying these tree trimming contracts are large that we have come through. I think the last one I saw come through council was for over $30 million. Don't quite remember the period of years that may have covered. If we don't meet those goals, are we receiving discounts back in terms of the work that's being contracted out? Do we still pay that full amount, or
no? Yeah, we do. Good question. Great question, Councilman. We do. Those contracts that we sign with those contractors are for certain dollar amounts, presuming we're going to be able to accomplish the work that we set out. And we only pay as they go. So those dollars are expended as they trim. So they're not paid in advance, and it's not a take or pay. So that's hopefully that answers your question.
That's a small consolation. I'd still rather us meet the goals and understand.
Absolutely, we would too.
If it's a hurdle, we just got to get past it and do what's necessary.
Absolutely.
To abate any potential damage from storms like this. Next question is almost more of a political one, but I'll say something and let you chime in as well. And it's one that's been in the news lately, just about the potential sale of MLGW. Or is MLGW a public utility? And the answer is yes, it is. It is a division of the city of Memphis. The city of Memphis has its charter. MLGW has its own charter. In order to initiate a sale of MLGW, it would have to be put as a referendum vote on the ballot for the people to decide on. And I think from a practical political standpoint, that is just going to be a very difficult thing to achieve, whether you want it to be sold or not, we want it to be privatized or not. I think the reality is that's almost a political impossibility. We operate MLGW right now as a nonprofit. If we were to sell it, it would be to a for-profit entity that would be looking to increase revenues, probably decrease costs or some combination thereof in order to find a profit margin. So there's a chance, significant chance, I think, that utility bills would go up and that the vast majority of citizens and customers would have a lot of skepticism, a lot of fear and concern about that increased cost with not necessarily a guarantee to increase reliability or customer service. So that's my political take on it. There is discussion, and it's always been in the midst of decades. We've been talking about but my priority, and I think we're in a position to do that. But elections matter. The city council, the mayor that you elect, and then appoints the MLGW board, those do have an impact on our ability to effectively manage MLGW. Anything you'd like to add to that, JT?
No, I think you know more. I mean, I know there was some discussion about the sale of MLGW years back, and as I understand it, you're correct in terms of the referendum requirement. And let's just remember, MLGW is electric, gas, and water. So it's not just electric. So you have to sort of remember that as well. So no, but I think you hit on the points there. Where I think to the point of that question, I think the mayor in one of the things he was, I think, looking for, and he's doing this with, as we've talked about, establishing this advisory team to mitigate outages, was just trying to think about options and things that to be considered. Certainly, I think that is more of a holistic kind of a view, but I think you've answered the question pretty well.
Okay. And I see Gail Jones Carson also saying people do need to realize how good of a partner MLGW is to the community in terms of their availability. I think you don't necessarily, it's not something you'd necessarily know unless you've lived in other jurisdictions, or been a customer of other utilities. They mean it. If you've got a problem, they want you to reach out. They want to connect and be able to help you with that. And then you've got a lot of backups as well in terms of being able to contact your city council person and hold them accountable come election time, that you just wouldn't have if MLGW were sold off or privatized. So next question is about preparedness and the best thing and the best advice that y'all can offer customers for future events. And if their power does go out, the first steps they should take, not only in their home, but also in contacting y'all.
I'm going to probably ask either Jim or Gail to help with this as well. But one of the things that I think is really important to remember is in advance of the storm, and Gail and her team do a really good job of sending information out through the media to get customers prepared for the storm. But there are a lot of things customers should be thinking about, that no later than the day before. Things like keeping all your devices charged, turning up your refrigerator, making sure it's, if you're not sure you're going to have an outage or not, assume you will, and be sure you have a place to be safe and be prepared and understand how to operate generators and not to do them inside. There's a whole list of things that they've put together. Gail, I know I missed some things. You want to add to that, Jim? You're muted, I think, Gail.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not only do we communicate safety and all kinds of information to our customers during storms, we do this prior to storms, after storms. If people would sign up for social media, follow MLGW, you will learn a great deal about many things that will be helpful when it comes to storms and safety matters for our customers.
Yeah, being prepared, absolutely. Jim, you have anything you want to add to that? Thanks, Gail.
I think you and Gail both covered it well. Those are the basics, and I just echo Gail's recommendation. Sign up for our social media feeds. I follow us. I'm always impressed by the job that the communications team does. So that's the best way to stay in the know about what's to come and how to get prepared.
And even during a storm, many of our customers may not have power, but many do have cell phones or iPads that they rely on. So they can still keep up with what's going on at Memphis Light Gas and Water that's beneficial to them.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Even though the cost could be considerable, if a neighborhood, if a street, if an HOA, or even just an individual house wants to pursue burying some of the lines that are in front of them, is there a process and what is it?
So there is. I think Cliff DeBerry, I mentioned him earlier. If he's on, his area handles the engineering and construction related activities associated with doing those kinds of overhead to underground activities. So I'm going to ask Cliff, Vice President of Construction and Delivery, to address that.
How you doing? Cliff DeBerry, Vice President, Design, Construction, and Delivery. There is a process. Basically, they would have to make a request for that. Actually, Nick's area do that, JT.
Oh, that's right. Nick jump on here too. Nick Newman. Yeah, he's got the engineering group. Yep. Nick Newman.
Yeah, there is. If a customer wants to put the service from the pole into their house underground, they can go through and request for that, get a cost to have that done. As far as on the primary side or the MLGW lines, we look at that and we don't do a lot of that because it's cost prohibitive. But we have put some poor acting areas where we had lots of outages. We have put some overhead to underground to help those circuits that they do get knocked off a lot.
Okay, where do they put the request in? What's the point of contact?
So that's Cliff's area. That would be a work request. Put through our
builder services.
Details.
I can put the number in the chat. I don't know it right off the top.
Yeah, we'll get the number out because it'll take, if it's a customer, again, to the point, the reason we got both of them on here is because I'm not sure the questions. If it's about lines like primary lines, that circuit lines like we talked about, that's a different animal than getting my line to my house put underground, which is mostly what we'll hear from customers. They want the line from the street to their home, to their meter put underground. And that's the Cliff's area certainly would take that application and take that request and provide that service too.
Okay.
Yeah, and we definitely do that. We can give an estimate for that. They would just have to call request to build the services.
Yeah, get that number out so people will know. And if nothing else, they can always just call our customer service, the regular line, and they'll get them to the right person. But Cliff can get that number before we sign off tonight.
You can contact my office as well, and we'll try to we'll play traffic cop and help you navigate the process. So another question about, we have a lot of different lines on our utility poles. They're not all electrical lines. Some are carrying Comcast, AT&T. What is the process where it seems like we're able to restore a lot of the power, but now we're still dealing with the private contractors on our utility poles? What is the estimated time of repair? How has our relationship been with them and trying to get that sped up?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask Brad Gates. His team is the electrical folks. They go out, and we will, when we have down poles and whatnot, we of course work with them, coordinate with them to get their facilities back up too. They know how to do their part. We're really obviously concerned about getting our lines back up. But Brad, do you want to speak a little bit to how that may work as we go out and repair those lines?
Sure, JT. Brad Gates, Manager, Electric, Construction, and Maintenance. Like JT said, if we go out and there's a pole damage and there's other communication providers on that pole, we'll contact them via our control room and notify those and let them know that they need to go out and reattach to our pole. And in some cases, if it's like a wire down to their house, the individual house, we'll try to temporary it up the best we can just to help the customer out. But at the end of the day, the customer still needs to call, Comcast or AT&T, or whoever it might be, just to follow up to make sure that their requests got through the proper channels.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
Okay, thank you. So we're coming towards the top of the hour, and I think that was most of the questions that I have for MLGW. There are two more questions that I have, and it's related to storm cleanup on the city side, and so I'll take those. And one is what resources are available for those who cannot afford to repair damages as a result of the winter storm Landon. If it is related to tree trimming, debris, if you have just yard waste that is too large or difficult for you to move, there is a crisis cleanup hotline. The crisis cleanup hotline number is 430-0995. That's 430-0995. That is only available for a few more days, to my knowledge. And it is kind of a temporary service that is offered if you cannot afford or are not able to address some of the tree damage that you have in your yard. Is there anything that is available, JT, that you know of, if it is electrical related, or is that just something that is more going to be along the lines of the homeowner's policy?
Yeah, if it's tree damage, is that what you're talking about, or damage to the
damage related?
electrical?
Damage related to, where does MLGW's responsibility start and stop in terms of the infrastructure damage?
Yeah, so we will take care. We shared this a lot during the storm press conferences. But for customers served with overhead lines to their home, we actually provide that service up to what's called the weatherhead, which is the top of that pipe where the connection is made. And then from that point down is the customer's responsibility. You might recall I mentioned that we are working to pull together a opportunity to assist customers with no interest loans. We're still finalizing that. We haven't been able to finalize that yet, but we're working to get that done over the next few days to help customers who've had to hire an electrician, to help maybe reimburse them for those costs, or to pay the customers, maybe they have a deductible on their homeowners, to sort of help with that. And but it's really, the responsibility is at that weatherhead point up at the top of that stack is where the transfer, if you will, occurs. From there below into the house's responsibility is the customer's. But we're working to try to help with that, as I mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you. And last point, because I know it's going to be the next probably source of frustration as we're still dealing with the cleanup from the storm, is the debris that is out on the street right now. We still have a lot of trees and limbs that are out on the street, on the curbs, on the sides. I will tell people to be patient. The city of Memphis has brought in contract crews to pick up that bulk waste. Please go visit our solid waste website. You do not have to report it in. We have crews that will be combing the entire city on a weekly or biweekly basis. We are trying to do it in the off week of when we do typical trash bulk pickups. So you're going to have to look at your own schedule and see when they're going to be coming by. And part of the reason we have to get contract crews is just because it's so much work. And then also because of the nature and size of this, we are eligible for federal reimbursement. So for contracting purposes, it keeps it easier for separate accounting that we can be reimbursed for the cost or partial part of the cost of that pickup. It's going to take some time. I tried to get a date in terms of expectations of when we will see all the trees picked up from this past storm, but they weren't quite willing to commit to that. But we are going to keep at it until we get everything picked up. The only note would be is if you have placed debris up front that is too large. If a private contract crew came to your house and cutting up that 100-year-old oak tree, and you've got logs at the front of your house that are 3 feet in diameter, that is not within the ability of the equipment that we have to do. And that's going to be the responsibility of the homeowner to get that contract crew back out there to remove the largest debris. All of the specifications of what's too big or what's appropriate for us to haul away is listed on our solid waste website. So I encourage people to look at that if you have any questions about the debris that you see on your streets, your neighbors, or out in front of your house. Again, I want to thank JT Young and his team for everything they've done over the last 3 weeks, and for taking their time tonight away from families to be able to discuss this with everybody that has come here to participate. JT, any final words?
Well, thank you, Councilman Morgan. One quick thing, you may notice the number, we had a question about cost for converting overhead to underground. There's a number for our builder services that should be scrolling across the bottom, that 901-729-8630. That's again for those customers who are wishing to get their services converted from overhead to underground. Contact that number. We'll set up a time, someone come out and look at it, give you an estimate, and get that work done. But I do want to thank you, Councilman, for this opportunity for our team to engage with you and to engage with our customers, with the public, to help them understand what's going on, to explain how we're going to try to get better. I'd ask them to stay tuned. We are actually looking for opportunities and continuing to look for opportunities to improve our restoration processes. We are going to be sharing some more information with the council next week. We're going to have a more deep dive debrief internally at MLGW late next week. And so we're working hard to get better, and just want to thank customers for their patience as we continue to try to make things better for our community. And I echo what you said, Councilman. I think that it's certainly incredible to have seen the community come together in spite of, notwithstanding all the challenges. It's a great community, and I was just grateful to be a part of that and blessed to be a part of this team effort here at MLGW to try to get folks back on as soon as we could. So thanks for the opportunity tonight, certainly.
Yeah, thank you. Bottom line is something that's been reiterated is whether it's council or this team at MLGW, we're here to serve y'all. If there is an issue or problem, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is a passion and a joy, and part of the fulfilling part, I guess the fulfillment of this job in being able to connect customers with the services that they deserved and are owed. So again, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.